The manager mocked the cashier's stutter, thinking no one important was watching. But the quiet new hire wasn't who he seemed. And when he spoke, the entire store went silent. Here's what happened next. Now, before we continue, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Subscribe to the channel because tomorrow at the same time, we'll bring you another powerful undercover story that reveals the hidden realities behind the institutions we trust. You won't want to miss it. Richard Kane stared at the quarterly report spread across his polished mahogany desk, his brow furrowed in frustration. As CEO of Sun Valley Retail, a chain that had grown from 3 stores to 32 locations across the Northeast, he'd always taken pride in their customer-first approach, but these numbers told a different story. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered, pushing his reading glasses up his nose. Customer satisfaction scores had dropped for the 3rd consecutive quarter. Complaint emails had doubled, yet somehow his regional managers insisted everything was running smoothly. Just yesterday, the board meeting had been tense. "These satisfaction scores are alarming, Richard," Diane Porter, his most vocal board member, had said. "Either you fix this quickly, or we need to reconsider our management structure." Richard recalled his own experience from last weekend. He'd stopped at their Millfield location, dressed in casual clothes rather than his usual suit. The cashier had barely acknowledged him. The shelves were disorganized, and he'd overheard a manager speaking harshly to an employee. No one recognized him as the CEO, and what he witnessed disturbed him. "Something isn't adding up," he said to the empty office. Either his managers were deliberately misleading him, or they were blind to what was happening on their watch. The next morning, Richard arrived at headquarters early and pulled employee turnover data from the past year. The patterns were unmistakable. Certain locations had turnover rates as high as 70%, yet their managers reported stable staffing. Springfield's location particularly stood out. Highest turnover, lowest satisfaction scores, yet somehow maintaining profitability. The manager there, Natalie Reyes, had been promoted last year after showing impressive results at a smaller location. Richard picked up his phone and dialed his HR director, Clara Thompson. "Clara, I need your help with something unconventional," he said when she answered. 20 minutes later, Clara sat across from him, wide-eyed as he explained his plan. "You, want to go undercover? Like in those TV shows?" she asked incredulously. "Exactly. No advance notice, no special treatment. I need to see how these stores actually operate when they don't know the CEO is watching." "The Springfield location would be your best bet. Nobody there has met you in person." "Can you arrange for me to be hired there? Nothing special, just basic retail work." Clara nodded. "I can make it happen. But, Richard, are you sure about this? It's unorthodox." "So is losing customers at this rate, well," he replied, his mind made up. 2 days later, Richard stood in front of his bathroom mirror, barely recognizing himself. His normally trim-styled silver hair was now longer and unkempt. The designer stubble he usually maintained had grown into a scruffy beard peppered with gray. Contact lenses replaced his distinctive rimmed glasses, and he wore a faded baseball cap that cast shadows across his face. "Rich Coleman," he practiced, adopting a slightly different cadence to his speech. The backstory Claire had crafted was simple enough to remember. Retail experience from years back, looking to get back into the workforce after some time away. He traded his tailored suits for worn jeans, a plain button-down shirt, and scuffed work shoes purchased from a thrift store. The transformation was complete. Tomorrow, he would return to retail for the first time in over 20 years. Richard arrived at the Springfield Sun Valley store 15 minutes early, parking his borrowed Honda at the far end of the employee section. Inside, the employee area looked neglected. The break room had mismatched chairs, a microwave with food splatters, and a bulletin board overflowing with outdated notices. "You, Coleman?" A sharp voice cut through his observations. A woman in her late 30s with perfectly straight hair approached. "I'm Natalie Reyes, store manager. HR said you're starting today." Richard nodded, extending his hand. "Yes, that's me, Rich Coleman." Natalie briefly shook his hand, her grip firm but impersonal. "Your paperwork's already done, right? Good. We're short-staffed, so orientation will be quick. store layout, basic register training, employee policies. Then, you shadow different departments until we figure out where you'll be most useful. The tour was rushed and mechanical. Natalie pointed out departments but introduced him to no one. She recited policies like she was reading a script, occasionally checking her phone. Any questions? She asked as they ended near the registers. Who will I be working with today? Richard asked. You'll shadow Melissa in housewares this morning, then Tyler at the registers after lunch. Her phone buzzed and she glanced at it. I have to take this. Melissa is in aisle 7. She knows you're coming. As Natalie walked away, Richard noticed the strained expressions on employees' faces. Some looked exhausted, others wary. Conversations stopped when supervisors walked by. A cashier flinched when a customer raised their voice slightly. This wasn't the company culture he'd worked to build. This felt like fear. After a morning of following Melissa through housewares, learning little except that inventory systems were broken and management rarely responded to requests for help, Richard reported to the front registers as instructed. A line of customers had formed, with only 3 of 8 registers open despite the busy lunch rush. You must be the new guy, said a young man who looked to be in his mid-20s. I'm Tyler Brooks. They said you'd shadow me this afternoon. Richard immediately noticed the stutter, but more striking was Tyler's genuine smile, something he hadn't seen much of today. Rich Coleman, he replied, extending his hand. Thanks for showing me the ropes. Over the next hour, Richard observed Tyler work with a steady stream of customers. Despite his speech impediment, Tyler was exceptional at his job. He maintained eye contact, remembered returning customers' names, and handled difficult situations with remarkable patience. An elderly woman approached with a complex return and no receipt. Richard braced for conflict, but Tyler navigated the situation flawlessly. Mrs. D. Davidson, right? You bought this last Tuesday. I remember because you mentioned your granddaughter's birthday. Tyler pulled up the transaction history. Here it is. I can process that return right away. The woman beamed at being remembered. Thank you, dear. You're always so helpful. During a lull, Richard asked, How long have you been working here? Almost the 3 years now, Tyler replied. I started part-time during college. Now I'm full-time while I figure out my next step. You're really good with people, Richard observed. Tyler's face brightened. That's the best part of the job, making someone's day a little better, you know? What's taking so long over here? The sharp voice came from behind them, making Tyler tense immediately. Richard turned to see a tall man with slicked back hair approaching the register. We've got lines backing up, Brooks. Pick up the pace. The man glanced at Richard. Who's this? This is our Rich Coleman. He's new, Tyler explained, his stutter becoming more pronounced under pressure. I'm training him on registers, Jason. Jason Wells, the assistant manager according to his name tag, gave Richard a dismissive once-over. Another warm body HR sent us. Great. He turned back to Tyler. Remember what we talked about with efficiency. You're still the slowest cashier on staff. Richard noticed Tyler's hands trembling slightly as he scanned items for the next customer. I'm doing my best, sir, Tyler said quietly. Your best isn't cutting it, Jason replied, loud enough for nearby customers to hear. Maybe if you could get a sentence out without tripping over it, we'd move these lines faster. A flash of hurt crossed Tyler's face before he composed himself, focusing intently on the transaction at hand. The customer shot Jason a disapproving look. I think he's doing just fine, she said, but Jason had already walked away, barking orders at another employee. During a brief moment when they were alone, Richard asked Tyler, Is he always like that? Tyler hesitated. Jason has high expectations, he answered diplomatically. I heard he made Melissa cry yesterday, whispered a nearby cashier named Zoe. She asked for help with a customer complaint, and he told her to stop being incompetent in front of everyone. As the day continued, Richard noticed employees altering their behavior when Jason approached, speaking less, moving faster, keeping their heads down. It wasn't respect, it was fear. During his break the next day, Richard sat in the cramped break room, learning more about the store from Zoe and a stockroom associate named Marcus. The Springfield location had once been one of the Sun Valley's best, with high employee retention and customer satisfaction. Things changed when the previous manager retired 18 months ago. Natalie's not the worst, Marcus explained. She's just absent, mentally checked out, spends most days in her office unless corporate is visiting. That leaves Jason running the floor, Zoe added, lowering her voice. And he plays favorites. If he likes you, you get good shifts and easy departments. If not. What about Tyler? Richard asked casually. He seems good with customers. Tyler's a saint, Zoe said firmly. Best cashier we have. Customers love him. Marcus nodded. Management's another story. Jason rides him harder than anyone. Because of the stutter? Richard asked. That's part of it, Zoe replied. But it's more than that. Tyler actually cares about this place. He follows policy, helps customers, doesn't cut corners, makes the rest of management look bad by comparison. The following morning, Richard witnessed firsthand how bad things really were. During a team meeting, Tyler hesitantly raised a suggestion about credit card applications. The script we're using isn't working well. See customers tune out as soon as we mention credit. Maybe we could try a different approach. Jason's expression shifted to a sneer. Maybe we could try a different approach, he repeated, exaggerating Tyler's stutter dramatically. Several employees looked down uncomfortably. A few chuckled nervously. Tyler's face flushed deep red, but he maintained his composure, eyes fixed on the floor. The script works fine when properly delivered, Jason continued normally. The problem isn't the approach, it's the execution. Richard felt his fist clench involuntarily. The casual cruelty was shocking. Not just the mockery itself, but how normalized it seemed. Natalie stood nearby, saying nothing, her eyes briefly meeting Tyler's before looking away. Later, Richard found Tyler alone in the break room during lunch. Most employees were gathered around a table on the far side, leaving Tyler isolated. Without hesitation, Richard sat across from him. Mind some company? He asked. Tyler looked up, surprised but not displeased. Not at all. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Richard spoke again. You mentioned you've been here 3 years. That's impressive in retail. Tyler smiled faintly. Not what I planned, but here we are. What did you plan? Marketing, actually. That was my major. I took this job for extra cash during school and kept it after graduation. He hesitated. Jobs in marketing aren't exactly lining up for someone with a speech impediment. Has it always been this way, the stutter? Since I was 8, Tyler explained. Got worse in high school, better with therapy, worse again under stress. He shrugged. It's part of who I am now. Why stay here, especially with how Jason treats you? Tyler thought for a moment. 3 reasons. First, I'm good at this. Not the register part, but the people part. I remember their kids' names, their preferences. I make connections. He took a sip of water before continuing. Second, health insurance. My speech therapy is partially covered. And the third reason? Richard asked. Tyler's expression hardened slightly. Because people like Jason win when people like me leave. He wants me gone because I don't fit his image of perfect. If I quit, he gets what he wants. Richard was struck by Tyler's resilience. That's admirable. Not really, Tyler said. Sometimes it's just stubbornness. He smiled wryly. Besides, some customers specifically wait for my line. They say I'm the only one who takes time with them, older folks especially. It can't be easy dealing with the mockery. The stutter I've made peace with, the mockery... He trailed off. The worst part isn't Jason. It's everyone else pretending not to notice. Natalie, other managers, even some coworkers who laugh along. He looked directly at Richard. Silence enables bullies. Always has. 3 days into his undercover assignment, Richard noticed Jason's behavior toward Tyler worsening. The mockery was no longer confined to team meetings. It had become an almost hourly occurrence. During a busy afternoon rush, Jason appeared, clipboard in hand. Brooks, Jason announced loudly, your transaction times are still the slowest in the store. Tyler continued serving his customer, a mother with two small children. I'll try to pick up the pace, he replied without looking up. Try isn't good enough, Jason said, his mimicry deliberate and exaggerated. Maybe if you spent less time chatting and more time scanning. The customer frowned at Jason, then pointedly turned back to Tyler. Take your time, honey. We're in no rush. Later, an elderly regular customer approached Tyler's register. Hello, Mrs. P. Patterson, Tyler greeted her warmly. Find everything okay today? Yes, dear. And I brought you those cookies I promised, she said, placing a small container on the counter. Jason, who was walking by, stopped abruptly. What's this? Outside food at the registers is against policy. Tyler began to explain. It's just against policy, Jason interrupted, his mockery now shameless. Or is there a special Tyler exception I don't know about? Mrs. Patterson looked shocked. Young man, that is entirely inappropriate. Jason turned to her, his demeanor instantly transforming. I apologize, ma'am. We have strict hygiene protocols for our cashier's area. He took the container from the counter. I'll just put this in the break room for later. Later, Richard found the cookie container in the break room trash, unopened. The breaking point came during a particularly busy Saturday. The store was packed with weekend shoppers, all registers open and lines forming nonetheless. Richard had been assigned to customer service, giving him a clear view of the main checkout area. Tyler was handling a complex transaction, a customer with multiple coupons, some expired, arguing over which ones should be accepted. I can apply this one to your purchase, which actually gives you a better discount than the expired one, Tyler explained, showing the customer the difference on the screen. The customer, initially frustrated, began to relax as Tyler worked through the issue. I see what you mean. Thank you for taking the time to explain. Just as the situation was resolving, Jason appeared behind Tyler's register, tapping his watch dramatically. 4 minutes on one transaction, Brooks. The line is backing up to housewares. Tyler continued processing the transaction, his ears reddening. Almost finished, sir, the customer interjected. He's been very helpful solving my coupon issue. Jason ignored her. If you can't handle basic math without stuttering through it, maybe you should move to cart collection where you don't have to talk to anyone. The mockery was loud enough for customers in nearby lines to hear. Several looked uncomfortable. Tyler's hands trembled visibly as he tried to complete the transaction, causing him to miskey an entry. And now you're making errors, Jason said with exaggerated exasperation. Typical T. Tyler performance. The customer looked horrified. That's completely unprofessional behavior from a manager. Ma'am, I understand your concern, Jason replied smoothly, but you don't see the pattern here. This happens constantly. Tyler's face had gone from red to ashen. He tried to continue working, but his stutter worsened under the pressure. Could you please enter your P-pin? He managed to say to the customer. Jason smirked. Maybe I should translate? What Tyler is attempting to say is, I understand him perfectly well, the customer snapped. It's your behavior that's incomprehensible. Other customers in line were now openly watching. Some had phones out, possibly recording. Tyler finally completed the transaction, hands shaking so badly he dropped the receipt. As he bent to retrieve it, Jason loudly announced to the line, I apologize for the delay, folks. We'll get a more efficient cashier over here right away. Tyler straightened up, his face a mask of humiliation and barely contained emotion. For a moment, it seemed he might break down entirely, but with remarkable composure, he handed the receipt to the customer and said, Thank you for your patience. Have a good day. The customer took the receipt, then looked directly at Jason. I'd like to speak to your manager. Your behavior is absolutely unacceptable. Richard had seen enough. This wasn't just unprofessional behavior. It was deliberate cruelty designed to break someone's spirit. He stepped away from customer service, walking deliberately toward Tyler's register. His heart pounded, a mixture of anger and resolve fueling each step. Tyler, Richard said calmly, take a 15-minute break. I'll cover your register. Tyler blinked in surprise. I can't just go, Richard insisted gently. Get some water. Take a moment. Jason immediately stepped forward. New guy doesn't give breaks around here. Get back to your station, Brooks. Richard turned to face Jason directly. He's taking a break, and we're going to have a conversation about professional workplace conduct. Jason's eyebrows shot up. Excuse me? Who exactly do you think you are? Someone who doesn't tolerate bullying, Richard replied evenly. The customer at the front of the line nodded approvingly. About time someone said something. Jason's face reddened. You've been here, 4 days? You don't understand how things work. Brooks is inefficient, error-prone, and an exemplary employee who's been mistreated, Richard cut in. His professional CEO tone crept back into his voice. I've watched you deliberately mock him for a speech impediment. I've seen you undermine him in front of customers and coworkers. It stops now. A small crowd had gathered. Tyler stood frozen, halfway to the break room. Nearby cashiers had slowed their transactions, watching the confrontation unfold. Look, Coleman, if you want to keep this job, you need to mind your own business. Tyler's performance issues are a management concern, not yours. Performance issues? Richard laughed incredulously. Tyler has the highest customer satisfaction, the most accurate drawer counts, and not a single legitimate complaint. The only issue here is your behavior. Jason's face darkened. That's it. You're done. Clean out your locker. I don't think so, Richard replied calmly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet, flipping it open to reveal his company ID. Richard Kane, CEO of Sun Valley Retail, and this conversation is just beginning. The color drained from Jason's face. His mouth opened and closed wordlessly. The store fell into stunned silence. Tyler's eyes widened in shock. Nearby, a box crashed to the floor as an employee dropped what they were holding. Get Natalie, Richard said, his voice quiet but carrying the unmistakable weight of authority. Now! Someone scurried toward the management office as Jason finally found his voice. Mr. Kane, I can explain. Save it, Richard cut him off. I've seen enough, I've heard enough, and I've experienced enough to know exactly what's happening in this store. Natalie appeared moments later, her face a mask of confusion until she saw Richard's ID. Mr. Kane? How? My office, Richard said, gesturing toward what was technically her office. Jason, you too. As he followed a shell-shocked Natalie and a pale-faced Jason toward the office, Richard caught Tyler's gaze. The young cashier stood motionless, staring after him with an expression of disbelief and hope. Richard gave him a small nod. The time for silence was over. Inside the cramped office, Richard didn't waste time with pleasantries. Let me be clear about what I've witnessed this week. Systematic bullying of employees, mockery of a medical condition, intimidation tactics, violations of company policy. Jason stepped forward. Sir, I can explain. I'm not finished, Richard cut him off. I've seen inventory mismanagement, ignored maintenance requests, and a pervasive culture of fear. Most concerning is that neither of you are unaware of these issues. You're enabling them. Natalie finally spoke. Mr. Kane, we've been working with limited resources. The budget cuts. This isn't about budget cuts, Natalie. This is about basic human dignity. Richard's gaze hardened as he turned to Jason. Mocking an employee for stuttering? That crosses every professional and ethical line imaginable. Jason swallowed hard. Tyler's speech affects customer service metrics. I was trying to motivate improvement. Don't. Richard's voice was deadly quiet. Don't insult me by pretending that was motivation. It was cruelty, plain and simple. Natalie looked down, unable to meet Richard's eyes. I should have stepped in. I knew it was happening. Yes, you should have, Richard agreed. That's what leadership means. After a moment of heavy silence, Richard continued. Jason is terminated, effective immediately. Bullying is explicitly forbidden in our company policies. You violated those policies repeatedly and deliberately. Jason paled further, but didn't argue. Natalie, your situation is more complicated. Your failure was one of inaction rather than action. I'm placing you on a performance improvement plan. You'll work directly with our regional director for the next 60 days. As Jason left to gather his belongings, Richard turned his full attention to Natalie. I built this company on respect, Natalie. Not just for customers, but for every person who works here. Somewhere along the way, that core value got lost. The impromptu staff meeting was held after closing. Employees gathered in a semicircle, their expressions ranging from curiosity to anxiety. For those who haven't heard, I'm Richard Kane, CEO of Sun Valley Retail, he began. 5 days ago, I came here undercover to understand why this location's customer satisfaction scores were dropping while employee turnover was rising. What I found was troubling. He paused, taking in their faces. A culture of fear, bullying disguised as management, policies ignored, and most disturbing, good people staying silent while others were mistreated. A few employees shifted uncomfortably, others nodded in recognition. Let me be absolutely clear. This stops today. Jason Wells is no longer employed by Sun Valley. Natalie will continue as your manager, but with significant changes to how this store operates. Natalie stepped forward. I owe all of you an apology, she said. I failed you as a leader by allowing unacceptable behavior to continue. That's on me, and I'm committed to doing better. Richard only outlined the immediate changes. A new assistant manager would be appointed from within, scheduling would become transparent and fair, break policies would be strictly enforced, and any form of mockery or bullying would result in immediate disciplinary action. Starting tomorrow, he continued, I'm implementing an anonymous feedback system. Every employee will have direct access to both regional management and my office. No concerns will be dismissed, no complaints ignored. Richard looked directly at Tyler, who stood quietly at the edge of the group. We're also establishing a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination or mockery based on any personal characteristic, including speech patterns. This should have been obvious, but clearly we needed to make it explicit. After the staff meeting, as employees filtered out of the store, Richard spotted Tyler gathering his things by his locker. He approached quietly. Tyler, do you have a moment? He asked. Tyler looked up, still processing everything that had happened. Yes, sir, he replied, his stutter less pronounced than Richard had heard it all week. They moved to a quiet corner of the break room. First, I want to apologize, Richard began, meeting Tyler's eyes directly. Not just for Jason's behavior, but for the fact that it was allowed to continue for so long. That reflects a failure at every level of leadership, starting with me. Tyler shook his head slightly. You couldn't have known. I should have, Richard insisted. Creating the right culture isn't just about policies on paper. It's about making sure those values reach every level of the company. Tyler was quiet for a moment, then asked, Why did you do it? The undercover thing? Reports and numbers only tell you so much, which, Richard explained. I could see something was wrong, but not what. I needed to experience it firsthand. He paused. I never expected to find the level of targeted bullying that you endured. It wasn't just me, Tyler said softly. Others had it bad too. Richard nodded. I know. And that's going to change. They sat in comfortable silence before Richard continued. I heard what you told me about wanting to work in marketing. Is that still true? Tyler looked up surprised. Yes, but with the economy and my speech. Your speech isn't the barrier you think it is, Richard said firmly. Your ability to connect with people, remember details, and show genuine care. Those are marketing skills that can't be taught. Hope flickered in Tyler's eyes. What are you saying? I'm saying we have a marketing department at corporate that could use someone with your talents. It would start as an associate position, but with clear advancement opportunities. Tyler's expression shifted from disbelief to cautious excitement. Are you offering me a job? I'm offering you the chance to interview for one, Richard clarified. No special treatment. You'd need to demonstrate your capabilities. But I'd be surprised if you didn't impress them. Tyler seemed to process this, emotions playing across his face. I don't know what to say. You don't need to decide now, Richard assured him. Take some time to think about it. Either way, things will be different here if you choose to stay. Tyler nodded slowly, then looked directly at Richard. "Thank you for seeing me," he said, the words coming out deliberately and clearly. Not just hearing me, but actually seeing me. The simple statement hit Richard with unexpected force. How many employees across his company felt invisible? How many Richard Kanes were needed in stores where no CEO was watching? "That's the bare minimum you deserve," Richard replied, "and it's what every employee deserves." As they stood to leave, Tyler hesitated. "One more thing," he said. "The stuttering, it will never completely go away. In interviews, presentations, it's part of me." Richard smiled. "Then Sun Valley will be stronger for having voices like yours represented. Diversity isn't just about how people look. It's about how they think, speak, and experience the world." For the first time since Richard had met him, Tyler's smile reached his eyes, unguarded and genuine. Have you ever witnessed workplace bullying and felt powerless to stop it? What would you have done in Richard's position? Step in immediately or gather more evidence first? If you were in Tyler's shoes, would you stay at the store under new management or take the opportunity to interview at corporate? Sometimes the hardest choices come after the crisis has passed. These stories remind us that leadership isn't about titles. It's about speaking up when others won't and standing firm against injustice, even when it's difficult. If you found this story meaningful, please hit that like button and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Subscribe to our channel for more Undercover CEO stories that reveal what happens when leaders see their companies through fresh eyes. Don't forget to turn on notifications by clicking the bell icon so you never miss our weekly uploads. Check out other videos appearing on your screen right now to see what happens when CEOs discover the truth behind their company's closed doors. And we'll be seeing you again tomorrow at the same time with another brand new video.